Thank you, Sudhir, for bringing us together for this. And this is the Avancina family standing in front of their homestead. And it's looking as if you were standing right in front of the farmhouse and down towards the CB. The house on the left was their first house, and there was a cabin here when the man standing in the picture, Sebastian Avancina, who was a stowaway on a ship from Italy, leaving from Naples or Genoa, I'm not sure. And they didn't find him out until they were halfway across the ocean. The seasick passengers would give him food. And he worked his passage off once he got to New York. And then he ended up as a street peddler in the 1860s, right after the gold rush, in San Francisco. And I can imagine he had a little cart and was selling stuff. So he got this land. At that time, this land was what we have, and all the way down almost to Mount Madonna Road. It's 1,200 acres as a collection on a bad debt. So you can kind of imagine what land might have been worth in those days. He moved up here in August, coming up from the Gilroy side, and he didn't realize there was an ocean out there for a full month. It was so foggy, you know. There's lots of stories about him and the family. The house on the left there is right where the sewing shed is right now, or, you know, Kailashpati is living there, right? And that was burned down by that little boy who's standing right beside his daddy. That was Emilio Avancina, who we'll see later in the pictures. And one time he started a big fire in the fireplace, and all the sparks started shooting up, and they landed and caught the roof on fire. Everything was built out of redwood from here, all of these buildings. And they were very self-sufficient, you know. They had their own blacksmith shop. They had a carriage house and this big barn, which the county made us tear down most of that. You'll see pictures of that later. But they were subsistence up here, and they also cut redwood trees and sold the wood. They planted an orchard, and at one time there was 30 acres of prune plums up here, and they harvested hundreds of tons of prunes, and that was a big business in the whole Santa Clara Valley, as you probably know. So that building burned down. By that time, they'd cut down the trees in front of the farmhouse, where the farmhouse is right now, and they moved the house over there. And so there's a few things about this picture. But if you see the trees in the background, those are the original trees. But if you notice, it's almost the same configuration as the trees which are there now, because genetically they're the same trees, and then they're growing up in the same place, so the wind affects them in that way and so forth. But you can see how the spacing of the trees was much wider apart in those days, so in the original forest. So those are a few things about this picture. And they had 3 daughters and 2 sons, anyway, the daughters didn't get the land. They married, and the sons got the land. Emilio got this land, which was the home ranch, this 300 acres. And he lived here, and he farmed it for 77 years, worked it. And he finally moved off because his knees were giving out. He was a horseman, and he had, on his light wagon and his fast team, he could make Watsonville in 45 minutes. So that's moving, man, you know? And I asked him, well, how'd you do it? And he said, about living at this place and making a living. He said, well, we worked from sun to sun, you know? That was it.
Some things don't change.
And he liked what we did up here, as opposed to some of the other people who thought we ruined the place, you know? He came up here and said, oh, you've done so much work up here. He liked it. Anyway, we'll see him later in this show, too.
Is the shed that's in front of the barn, was that here when we moved here? Is that where Lila and
That's where Lila
lived?
and Brajesh lived, and we'll
Yeah.
see that later too. Yeah, that was the old wagon shed.
That's
Yeah.
where the CC stands now.
Yeah. Yasen, you want to say anything about this picture?
Well, that's Mr. Avancina and Gary Patton and Dayanand and me. That, I believe, was probably our first open house. And the building right behind us there was the original wood shop. So that was just opposite the farmhouse. And when we applied for permits to start this project, we had 8 hours of public testimony before the Planning Commission, which we passed 3-2. And then we had hearings before the Board of Supervisors, and Gary Patton was a member of the Board of Supervisors, and he voted for us, and there were 3 votes against 2 to let us get started. And the whole saga of the 2 years that we spent writing, we wrote, I think, the first environmental impact report, and we did an enormous amount of work. Brajesh figured out the user day formula with the county. It was quite a saga. We had bought an option on the property, and we had 2 years. We gave him $40,000, and no, was it 40? Yeah, we gave him 40 or 20. I remember what it was. 40, yeah. We collected $1,000 each from 40 people and handed it across, and bought an option for 2 years, and we just made it by the skin of our teeth. I mean, it was within a week of our option coming up, and that is a whole story, but I won't get into that one. But anyway, there's Mr. Avancina and
Mrs. Avancina, yeah.
And Kasum Lawrence,
yeah.
who was born here.
First baby born here,
And we just had the shroud for her mom.
right.
And
This is the main corridor, you guys. This is
the
how
lake
it was.
would be on your right,
Yeah.
and the CC would be on your left. And that was our first really big project, which was to tear that down. And that's Lila. And was that the carriage house?
Yeah, that's Lila's. You should tell Lila about your home.
So this was the carriage house, and I cleaned it all up, and my son was 7, and I put a floor in and a roof on and windows and stuff, and I lived there for about 5 years until the CC was built, and then I had to go elsewhere. But I had the whole view of the ocean, yeah.
So we tore down pretty much everything except the farmhouse.
Now this building was converted into a child care building.
Yeah.
Right, and the lake was behind it. There is no lake. We made the lake, but that's where the lake was, and the child care building stood till we built the lake. And that was cowboy quarters. And across from our road, you can see our road, there is where the preschool is. And there was also some cowboy quarters on that side. But we had who was in child care in that building that's in this room?
Oh, God. That's not
Nobody?
in this room. I can think of a lot of people.
We had a lot of fun in there.
Yeah. And where you're looking at is right at the bottom of the entry road, right there.
Yeah, just in front of the farmhouse.
Just as you get to the farmhouse would be on your left.
There looks like a puddle, too.
Yeah, it was pretty muddy back then.
Yeah.
And there was right across the street from that, and this is where the preschool kindergarten building is right now, and these were the cowboy cabins. So seasonally, people would come, workers would be hired to come up and help Emilio and Teresa manage the ranch, pick the plums, and round up the cattle and do different things that they were doing to make a living here.
The county required that we tear all these buildings down, including the barn, which we had hoped to keep.
That's the farmhouse.
Which we kept.
All right, historic building.
So where the backstop is that kids play on now that's what you'd be looking toward, looking toward the Naga Den.
That we kept for a while. That was the wood shop. And so that's just as you turn the corner to go around the lake. You know, you come down the road, and the farmhouse would be on the left behind that car, or next to that car, and turn the corner. And so that's where we had the all of the equipment that we used to build this place.
Yeah.
And you can see the pump, right?
Yeah, and on the right there, there's the old pump that ran that deep well shaft that's still there, and you can see how much we filled in there, because right now only about 6 inches of that well shaft is above the ground level. So, but the tree, or maybe more of it is, I don't know. But the tree there, I think, is still that pear tree that's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's another. That was a blacksmith shop. We tore that thing down, and the big barn. Yep.
And that's the
That's the wood shop.
from a different angle. So the lake is behind it, the canal lake. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the school bus stop.
This was a little barn thing that was right in the parking lot of the temple right now. The temple's right behind
Right.
that.
We kept our artifacts there.
We kept artifacts, right? And then also we had horses there for a while, and a pony, and a little corral right there.
Our first Christmas, we made it into a manger because it had all the creatures in it.
There's the farmhouse. And you are now in, you would have been in this building. This is what it looked like when we first came. This was the ranch house that Joe Chamberlain had. Joe Chamberlain owned the ranch, and we bought it out of his estate. And that is another story.
You can see how it had a carport, and that's what we walled up for the school.
First school, right?
So there it is.
It's a great addition there.
That was Mount Madonna School.
All right.
Just the carport.
A little bit of firewood there, yeah.
Wasn't Laura the first student?
Although she may not have started in that room. We had,
Well,
I
She
think,
was our first graduate.
she was our first graduate. Yeah, kindergarten, first, second, third, one-room classroom.
And then this was a project. It was actually my first big project here, which was building the kitchen onto the side of it. So this was what you're looking at now. Was after the fire. That was all that was left of the building, and so we somehow, I don't even remember how the heck we did it, but we dragged it over, and that was now
We put logs under it, and we hooked up the dozer, and we dragged it over, and it's now the cafe.
Yeah. Nothing goes to waste. It was on a log foundation, and then we put a regular foundation under it.
After the earthquake, yeah.
We got a temporary permit for that building, right?
Yes.
Oh, for sure.
Still is temporary.
Much like life is temporary. So yeah, so this was the framing of that kitchen.
Yeah, we may have missed saying that Joe Chamberlain's house, we remodeled it and put residence for programs under it and expanded it so it had a big meeting room. Yeah. And then it burned down.
Right.
And,
so yeah.
and now we're making the room that we're in right now.
In the main road?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a pony that we were gifted a pony, and the pony is pulling the push back. So push car. So he's pulling the cart.
We did that one.
We used to have pony rides on Saturdays. Here's child care.
Yeah, that's child care.
Where the lake is now. Right. Do you want a chair? Yeah, that's PK on the left, and who's on the right? There's Vishwanath and Widgety.
Widgety was a tenant here before we got here. And we acquired him with the land.
Yeah, he was one of Chamberlain's horses, and they told us that they would send him to the glue factories, so we bought him, and they also said he didn't have long to live, and he lived, what, a quarter century? One Thanksgiving he came in as part of a play. That was before it burned down.
Anyway, the shop, we had a great shop. It had all sorts of saws and a lathe, and we built a lot of cabinetry in that shop.
There was a little annex on the other side of that tree, and Purnananda and his 2 sons lived in that. So is this before any of the walls?
This is from the Yajna Mound, about where the Indian rocks are, and looking down the hill towards the Sadanand's house and Kalpana's and Sampat's house and the A cluster, B cluster, I guess it is.
Yeah, that Redwood Grove.
Yeah.
Just in from the right, that one right there, that's Ratna's house is on the left-hand side of that. Soma's house is to the right of that, and mine's above it on the hillside.
And the alignment of the Yajna Mound was set up by Babaji when he looked and he saw the alignment of the crest on the hill over there of the trees and the peak beyond. And then he dedicated that place for the Yajna ceremony, and that's where we started.
Wood processing.
Yeah, we did a lot of salvage jobs in those days, and we would go down to Fort Ord and take down buildings. It was one of the crazier things we ever did. But we had no money, and we had lots of energy, so it seemed to make sense at the time.
So many things did, which wouldn't anymore. Here was the big project.
Taking down the barn, and those are the Baz boys up on the rafters there, doing the dangerous work.
Yeah.
Our equipment was fabulous.
Yeah, a couple of trucks.
The truck that you're seeing to the left is the orange truck, which was a fabled truck that lasted a long time. I think that came from your father's
Yeah,
business.
it was my dad's, one of my dad's trucks,
Yeah.
and he gave it to me, and the center needed it so much, I ended up having to get another truck. But Babaji oversaw all these projects, and he, just like he is in this picture, just watched. And we didn't realize, but he was like our chief safety officer.
Yeah.
Because we were doing crazy stuff, but it was all under his supervision and watchful gaze. So this is something for us to take note on going forward, because now we have to do this. We have to be the presence to keep ourselves safe and motivated, because he also put us up to all this crazy stuff.
Yeah. There's the Queen, Lila, right in the middle there.
And I think Sadhana to her right.
To the right, yeah. And I remember the guy to the left, but I don't remember his name.
Jason.
Who?
Jason or
Jason.
Sunil. Mm-hmm.
Looks like he already broke his arm. Yagya.
Yeah, this is the Yajna Mound. This is how it started.
Yeah.
The-
Babaji giving SN some instructions.
Yeah.
We're already building the temple in this one, right? Because that's the
Yeah,
archway.
yeah, that was actually the archway at the top of the stairs.
There's Govind.
Govind.
So Govind was,
There's your guy's grandpa.
there you go, Gus's grandpa, and an absolute genius builder. He could figure anything out. He was a licensed contractor, but he and Dayanand and I, after the fire, designed this building.
A contractor with the soul of an architect.
And an artist, and he also did a lot of the design on the CC. Dayanand knew the land. I was pretty good on layout, and he put it in 3 dimensions. And if you look at the set of plans for that, I don't know, there's not more than about 10 pages. By the time we got to the CC, it was like 60 pages of plans. And you just saw this acceleration of requirements by the county for each building as it went forward. We built this building for $28 a square foot. if any of you have ever built anything, you'd know that that would seem impossible now. The CC we built for about $150 a square foot, and by the time we got to the school, it was about $300 a square foot. So that's the progression of government in action.
And is Govind standing on the top of the temple?
Yeah.
I just want to mention that Govind was also one of the sweetest and gentlest teachers. I was working on a project at one point with him. It was the fruit stand that we brought over from remember that?
Yeah,
Right,
the
which
sewing
is-
shed was
Yep.
a fruit stand on Highway 152, and the people went out of business. They were friends and acquaintances and asked if we wanted it. And we were doing salvage, and we went and got it and brought it over.
And so at one point, I was working on the joists or something that would be under this transported fruit stand, and Govind was there, and he was sort of supervising the whole thing. He came over and just very gently told me how I could do what I was doing in a better way, without making me feel bad at all, and just being very helpful to me, because I could do it in a better way, and he was helping me learn that. And I'll never forget just how sweet he was in pointing that out.
And Govind had a huge part in design and building of the school campus up top too.
The sewing shed, or Kailash Bhatti's place, Babaji said we made a pair of pants out of a patch.
Govind also helped design Soma and Purnima and my house.
And he was the school was really it was his genius, and that was like a magnum opus for him. The middle and high school, all that incredible woodwork and so on. That's his
Parting gift.
And the Oaks cabin are named Govindam. Babaji named them Govindam.
Yeah. I remember him telling me, and I really get it now. He said, yeah, this is when he had cancer, and he was still working. And he said, yeah, I can still do a day's work, just not 2 days in a row.
So here Babaji's teaching swords. He taught all kinds of martial arts to us. I'm not sure where...
This is Camp Swig.
Is Camp Swig?
I think
Looks like it, yeah. Could be.
Either Camp Swig or Camp Campbell.
Yeah, I think it's Camp Campbell.
We used to rent, before we had this property, we used to rent funky camps in the Santa Cruz Mountains, but have very large retreats. People were very interested in yoga then in the mid-'70s.
And Babaji would kind of go into a trance when he did these demonstrations.
So, is anybody here who was there that day? Because I've heard some interesting stories about him taking the sword and demonstrating a very wild version of the sword dance. SM?
I was there, yeah.
And did it impress you, or just another amazing moment?
Well, it's just who he was, you know. I mean, he would get into stuff. He knew martial arts, various forms of martial arts. He taught the kids the staff stuff that you see in the Ramayana, those staff fights and so on. And it was actually part of the curriculum of the school that the kids learned to use the staffs. And he was just, he was a master of the craft. I mean, you have to, I recommend if you read his autobiography, you get a sense of where he came from, and all the stuff that he learned, you know, growing up in India, and brought it here. And so, yeah, this was just a moment when he let it all go, let it hang out, and it was pretty impressive.
He taught all kinds of dance.
Yeah.
As well as this martial arts and
Stick dancing, yeah.
stick dance, mudra dance, and it's a little hard to see, but he's holding two swords. The one in the lower part looks kind of like a lightning bolt.
Yeah.
And he would get everyone up in the room that wasn't singing dancing, sometimes in two big circles of stick dance, and I remember at a certain point he was leaping in between these two circles of stick dancing with two swords.
You can see the child on the right that's already holding two sticks, ready to go.
The stick dance was also a practice for martial arts.
That's also Govind.
Calabasas?
Mm-hmm.
So that's before we bought the land.
That was the first retreat, I believe.
Yeah, so 73, 74. Sita and Janardhan getting married. That was in the program's house before it burnt down.
Looks like I'm getting started right there. Ah, yes.
The cleanup after the fire.
After the fire, this is what was left.
And the cafe.
And this, yeah, you can see the back of that part. That's the back that we saved that became the cafe. And I remember I drove Babaji up that morning, and he got out of the car and he walked up and he looked at the building and he took out his chalkboard and he wrote, "The program house burned down, ha ha." That was his comment. Huh?
Ho, ho, ho.
Ho, ho, sorry, ho, ho. And it was an exercise in non-attachment because we had just added on something like 3,000 square feet to the building. And so it was a building that was 2,000 square feet. We had built up to 5,000 square feet and then gone.
And we had just finished our house, and we hadn't quite moved in yet, so the community moved into our house as the kitchen and dining hall, and we had framed up the seminar house. So we moved our classes in there, had a roof, but no inside walls. So, that's how we did it, kept going.
So the back half of the kitchen that we rolled over and set up where is now the cafe, that became our kitchen. And this is after we had moved out of Dayanand's house, because that was our first kitchen. And then that became our kitchen, and the cafe portion of it actually was the dish room. And we had the two metal boxes that are up behind the yoga room up there. That was our refrigerator. And we ate on picnic tables in the dust outside that building for quite a while until we got this building built.
What year was this?
84?
Yeah, about 84. Yeah. We started in the other building burned down in 82. Yeah, Shivaratri 82.
Can you say a little more about the community at this point? Like, how many people were living here on the land? How many people were coming out daily? Were you hosting retreats at that time?
Yeah, we were hosting retreats, and I think there was about, depending on whether it was summer or winter, we were about 30 to 60 people here. And in summer we got bigger because people came up and lived in tents. Babaji had this idea that we would rotate between living here and living in town. And so the rotation system kind of came from that. It didn't really work out that well, that you could have a job in town and then leave it for 3 months and come back, but he thought that could happen, but we did have a lot of people come and help us in the summer, and then we had big work days. The days that Babaji came up, Thursdays and Saturdays were big. I mean, 30 to 50 people at least would come up, and we do classes and sadhana and go out to work, have breakfast, go out to work, and work till tea time, come in and go back out to work, and then come in for dinner, and then volleyball.
Until dark.
Until dark, right. So
and then he'd go home.
Right.
We
we had the van that would meet at SN's house at Palmini.
Right.
And we had like a big shuttle that would drive us up
That's
for the
right.
day, and then we'd go back to SN's house.
And I don't think there were that many people living here at that time.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
It was quite a bit smaller as far
Oh,
as
yeah.
full-time residents.
yeah, maybe 20, something
At
like
the
that.
most.
Yeah.
And on the big work days, there were so many small children in the satsang then. There'd be like 30 kids in the childcare while their parents would go do other work.
So which yogya is this?
And Bhav was the leader in childcare. God bless you.
Well, Shankar still is officiating here,
Yeah.
Right.
so
But
it's
what's
fairly early. And
The barn's still there.
Who's
Yeah.
getting married?
Somebody's getting married there. I don't
Yeah,
know
they
who
have
it
their
is.
backs to us. So. I'm looking at the parents. But
Oh, gosh.
the earthquake.
The earthquake.
This was the earthquake. Oh, my God.
This was Bhairav's house where Sunil lives right now.
And it fell off
down
its
the mountain.
foundation. I mean, it split in two and fell off its foundation. And we had to, we got right on it. So we got down to the lumber company to buy beams, and we were jacking up a house virtually every day for I don't know how long it was.
think
But
we
this
had about-
one, this was the champion. We had to jack the front of this one up about at least 4 to 5 feet, and then roll it back and reconnect it with the other building. It was really dangerous work, but that's what we did in those days.
And this was all while aftershocks were going on. So the guys were crawling under the house,
Yeah.
and then there'd be these aftershocks. And those of us that didn't crawl under, we were saying, "Get out! There's an aftershock."
Yeah.
Yeah, aftershock was a relative term. There's like 5, 6 on the Richter scale,
Yeah.
aftershock. Hundreds.
But we lost, I don't know how many houses, because the way we were building them then is they were on piers. And so what we wound up doing is actually jacking them up and putting them on foundations, mostly tent structures.
I think we had 14 small buildings fall down. None of our big stuff fell down. But the globes in this house, in this room,
Yeah.
were swinging such that they hit the roof
And
broke.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was a big earthquake, and it was like 10 miles straight down in the earth. You know, it was about 6.9 Richter, I think.
Yeah.
And the epicenter was 5 miles up the road.
Oops. Okay. That's not the only truck that did that. I just want you to know. we had a couple of things where nature went out, but the old dump truck, that truck had quite a history. I remember somebody forgot to set the brake, and we watched it roll down the hill, which would have been through my house, and just launch out into space.
I'll tell the story on this one, because that's me in the back there. So we were building the lake, right? And so Babaji had us like about 4 different dump trucks and a backhoe and a inside where the lake is now, putting dirt in the back of the dump trucks, and we would do a round and dump on the terraces in front here. So that's how these terraces were created, is all the earth that was in the lake made the terraces. And so this is where I forgot to open the tailgate before you dumped, right?
It's the only mistake she ever made.
Right. And I had Cheetah in the cab with me. And you can't get down from there, right? It's kind of hard to get down from there. Anyway, what I do remember is about 90 degrees or something. And we were had clothes, and the dust was everywhere. And Babaji was having us all drink lassis, right? To try to keep hydrated. And I mean, it was just really incredible having, driving all day long, all this stuff, moving all this dirt, and creating the lake and creating these terraces.
He was very, very proud of himself on that one. That's Vivek, who conceivably could have done that on his own. He's a massively strong person. But Babaji used to brag. He'd say, we dug the lake, and then we put the dirt, and we made the terraces, and, he just thought
At the same time, we were leveling the upper lot and getting all the rocks from there.
To build the walls.
So Babaji had 3 projects going. Took about 3 years to do, and he loved it.
Leo, do you... I don't think it hit anything.
It didn't hit anything. They dumped it, but they didn't open the tailgate, so the weight of the dirt lifted the front of the truck up.
When it flew, it hit a redwood tree. And it broke the redwood tree, and it fell down to the ground like a dead thing.
Yes.
And that's it here in the front right corner.
That's right, yeah.
It was Pornanon and I were working on the dump truck, and we set the brake, but it wasn't very good. It's about where Lila's house was. And so we just watched it go down the hill, and it took off part of the tops of some trees. And when we finally got it down, I had a little Polaroid camera in the cab, and it had shot out 2 pictures of nothing but black and squiggly lines and things, but that's the dump truck flying.
So that was digging the lake. You can see that we had the old backhoe, and Dayanand's on the bulldozer down there. This was Babaji's concept too. It was kind of just a little swale, and he saw the lake, and we excavated down and then built the dam, compacted the dam, and on it went.
And during one of those big fires, we had a helicopter came and took water out of that lake.
I think this is a group looking, doing foraging. You know, the man on the most right is Punita McPherson's husband, who was part of the environmental movement, and he was a scientist. And then Rajendra, straight across, not the Rajendra that's living here now. Yeah, that Rajendra was also. And Janie Belknap, right? So I think they were learning about the plants in the forest.
Yes, and you're the only one in there who's here, but what's this of? Do you remember?
I think this was a yoga teacher training group.
It's one of the first YT2s, I think.
Yeah. I confess, I taught in the day sadhana, the morning sadhana for that, for the first yoga teacher training retreat, but I had never took and still have never taken yoga teacher training.
Do you recognize
my training happened when we were in Toronto, and Shankar and Babaji and Ma and I went to do a retreat in Toronto, and I went to a class with him in the morning thinking I was going to his class, and he turned to me and he said, "Teach." And that was my yoga teacher training.
The people I recognize, I can see Dr. O.P. in the front row, I think, third.
Janaki and Savitri.
Yeah, Janaki, Savitri.
Rashmi, weren't you in that first training?
Varna.
Varna. That's Kishore in the back row, and Badri.
This guy in the middle with the blue shirt, his name is Neil. And when I was in Hawaii this summer, I ran into him. And we asked each other our names, and I said, my name was Sudhir, and he said, "You're the Sudhir?" And I said, "Yeah," and he said, "I used to go to Babaji and complain about you because you were so hard on me," and he would just laugh.
Is that Kranti in the front row?
I don't think so.
No.
That was watching, wasn't that watching the Olympics? The Olympics were one year, we did them in front of us. There's Rashmi, I think. Rashmi and Janaki.
Is that Gunn up there?
But I think we were,
Mr. Gunn?
I think the Olympics were in front of us. What were they watching? We were watching ourselves play, having lots of fun playing. Christmas.
Suchitra, Bholanat, Janaki,
Badri.
Ratna.
No.
There you are,
That's
Ratna.
me in the braids. I thought it was Bhavani.
No, that's you.
Who's the baby? I think it's Ram,
It's Ram. It's
right?
Ram and Janaki.
So it's Janaki or Naranjan, and then Prema. Another open house. They
Open
grew.
house. That was when we had almost finished building this building.
We used to have open houses every year to try to introduce ourselves to the public and invite dignitaries to come that gave us some sense in society, invited all the neighbors, and hopefully invited people that didn't know us who would come and see who we were and want to participate with us and trust us. I can see Dr. Gunn, who was very pivotal in us getting our permits. He's on the far left, I think sitting next to Dayanand.
Yeah, when we were applying in that 8-hour testimony, they would put up somebody against us, and then we would put up somebody for us, and they would put up somebody against us, and we put up somebody for us, and that's the way the whole thing went. And so we had some wonderful people who got behind us in the early days. Sharda's parents were big supporters at that point, maybe our best at that point. They were totally behind us. But the neighbors were worried about who we might be.
And Dr. Gunn, whose summer home was up Summit Road, but he was superintendent of schools in Palo Alto, so he was a well-known educator in our area. He served on our first Mount Madonna School Board. Kalpana and I went and invited him, and he graciously accepted to be on our school board.
Gregory.
Gregory Bateson.
Mm-hmm. So this is Gregory Bateson, and he was one of the great minds of our times. His first wife was Margaret Mead. They were both anthropologists, and he was a cyberneticist, and he was actually on the, University of California?
He was several of us studied with him at UCSC.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was one of the people that got UCSC going, the wild early days where Dayanand and Sharda went to school. And
Sudhir and many people went to school there.
Yeah, I don't.
From us, yeah.
Ma's daughter was in my class.
Okay, there you go. A lot of legends went there. And Gregory himself was a legend. His wife, his second wife, was Lois Bateson. She was the one that first saw this property and let us know that it was available.
She knew the man who was caretaking this property, whose name was Ralph Haskin, and Ralph had been a Forest Service guy down in Big Sur, so she knew them. They knew each other from that, and she showed him, Lois showed to Ralph, this letter that we had written with all the things that we wanted, you know. We wanted to be secluded but close to town, and we wanted to be natural setting but roads and electricity and water, you know. So we had all these things that we wanted, that Babaji had us write this letter. We sent it out to realtors in the 3-county area, and we got back answers like, only in heaven. Tell us when you find it. Right? And anyway, Lois showed this letter to Ralph, and Ralph said, oh, I know that property. I'm caretaking that property. And Ralph was a born-again Christian. He lived up here, and he was saving this property for a spiritual group. Of course, he had claimed this property for Christ and thought that it would be a Christian group, but he wanted to check us out, so we brought Babaji up to meet Ralph, you know, and Babaji, Ralph got the idea and started talking in tongues in front of Babaji, and Babaji says, what? You know, like, what is this? I said, oh, Babaji, he's talking to God now, you know, so anyway, you know, Babaji had the kind of persona that Ralph realized that we were a spiritual group. and said, okay, he'll sell it to us. And he helped us. And he actually helped us by not showing it to other buyers and stuff at the time. So we kind of squeaked in, as Sadanand said. And Gregory helped. Gregory came to that hearing that Sadanand is talking about. Gregory and Dr. Gunn, and they spoke for us, and they had gravitas. Yeah. And, you know, so the planning commissioners who voted for us and the Board of Supervisors said, let's give these people a chance. Yeah.
Without that, the neighbors thought we were a cult, you know, because this was the time of Jim Jones and the Kool-Aid and Rajneesh and the Rolls Royces. It was, you know, there was a lot of sensationalism in the news at the same time.
Yeah, it's true. And I remember Badri and Dayanand and I went to talk to Gregory. Remember that, Dayanand? And there are two things I remember from that. The first thing he told us is he said, we were going to him for advice because he was a wise man, and he said, be your own anthropologist, which means that you had to always be able to stand back and see the changes that were going on with you and your community so that you didn't just get too focused on your own thinking. And the other was don't make red shirt laws. And we said, what does that mean? And he said, well, if you don't like someone and they wear a red shirt and you say anybody who wears a red shirt can't be in the community, you're going to have a very complex set of rules and your community will fail. And the thing I really delighted me is Badri said to him, he said, well, I'm getting my PhD in psychology. And Gregory kind of stroked his chin and he said, He said, that could be an irrelevant stepping stone. He had a great sense of humor. Anyway, he's a legend, and he's wrote many books, and his daughter, Mary Catherine Bateson, his eldest daughter, came here at one point. She was also an anthropologist, and his younger daughter, with Lois, got married here.
Nora.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Nora, yeah.
So since we're on this top, somebody's trying. Yeah, please.
I have a question. Is it true that the FBI once looked into the fellowship?
I hope so.
Can you tell us?
It is true. Somebody's parents said wanted to check us out, so they went to the FBI, and the FBI said, "Oh, they don't have any money.
They're safe."
Right.
Yeah, I heard that they weren't concerned because we're a harmless group of monkey worshippers.
Well, that covers
more or
it.
less, yeah. But the neighbors. There was one neighbor that lived down on the corner of Mount Madonna and Summit, who's not here now, but he had just moved here from Sonoma County, where he lived down the road from Morningstar Farm, which Zan knows about, right? Because she was up there, and she can ask her the details. So Morningstar Farm was founded by a guy named Lou Gottlieb, who was a great musician, and he played in the Limelighters, which was kind of Kingston trio type group back in the day. So he bought this land and he deeded it to God. And see, that's what was happening, like free land, right? You know, free love, free land, you know, this is the thing. So anyway, it ended up with people living in abandoned cars and stuff, and the sheriff comes in and there Lou's practicing his piano in his cabin, and the sheriff says, "Lou, I'm busting you for operating an organized camp without a permit." And Lou looks up from his music and says, "Sheriff, I defy you to find one thing organized about this place." So this guy was a refugee from that, and then we come, you know, to be his neighbors, and he was going, "Oh my God!" But you know,
we did go and meet all the neighbors, and I'd say it's more was 50-50. Many people could see the potential of who we were and what we were. And one neighbor tried to buy the place after they found out that we were buying it. So it was definitely 50-50. But my greatest memory of that was Mrs. Estrada, not current Mrs. Estrada, but
Loretta, yes.
Not Loretta's mom, right?
Yes, yes.
Loretta's mom, and we went to meet her and her husband, but she just said, "Will you respect the law of the mountain?" And we said, "What is the law of the mountain?" And she said, "We do what we do. We care for this land. We respect everyone who lives here, and we don't interfere."
Yeah, what happens on your own land is your own business.
The Estrada family owns all of the hill below us.
This picture was the call to dinner, was the conch.
And I think that's Mukti, isn't it?
Oh.
That's Dayanand, yeah. That was, I believe, the first yoga teacher training program. She took it.
Where was the fireplace?
So the house that Prabha is in, Dayanand had built, I should say. We built for her. So this is Leonard Street, I believe. And this is a board meeting at Leonard Street. And that's Janie Belknap, who was the secretary at the time. And various and sundry other critters, but that was early board meeting.
I can see Ratna and Sadhana. There's Ma, that was Ma in India. Radha, Badri.
Ratna, who else? I don't know.
This was at the ashram, and they brought the camel to us.
Ma wanted to take a camel ride.
There were camels or bicycles. Those were the choices. There. And Dayanand got a motorbike, and Ma needed to get home, so off they went.
Did you drive?
Who was Ma? Who was Ma Renu? Ma Renu sponsored Babaji. She was an art professor from UC Davis, and she sponsored Babaji from the time he arrived until her death, and then continued to sponsor him until his death by leaving her house for him to live in until he passed away. And she has children and grandchildren, and she was instrumental in the publishing and editing of Babaji's work, as well as in the founding of the orphanage.
The story of how she became his sponsor is an interesting one. Some of Maranus Ruth Horstings, Professor Ruth Horstings' students had read Be Here Now, and it talked about a teacher that had taught yoga, not a guru, a teacher who taught Ramdas yoga. And these students said, well, sounds like a pretty cool guy. Let's go over to India and see if we can find him. And they did find him, and it was Babaji. And Babaji happened at that moment to reach the stage, there are like stages traditionally in a yogi's life. At a certain stage, you go from being I forget what it is, a beginner to being a student to being a teacher, whatever it was. At a certain stage, you've gone through all that, and at that point, you just go wherever you're asked to. You're free of all commitments. You no longer have any duties of a certain stage. You just go where you're asked. And at that point, these students met him and said, would you come to the United States? Because they saw this was a pretty incredible guy. And so he had never been outside of India before. He went halfway around the world, didn't speak the language, because he had been asked, would you come? And he just automatically said yes. And Ma Renu knew he was coming, and he couldn't come without a sponsor. She had an intuition. It was just an intuition that this would be a person who would change her life forever. An intuition which turned out to be absolutely correct. And she said that from the moment she saw him come off the plane from India, come down, she knew that her life was just, it was all to be changed. And she said yes to that. And because she said yes to all of that, we're all here.
She was a professor, a tenured professor at UC Davis with a very respectable job as a fine artist. And she said yes to this thing, you know, this. And then she would have these dreams that Babaji would get off the plane in a three-piece suit because she was, you know, like terrified of, you know, her whole reputation, her whole life, her whole everything. And that Babaji got off the plane, he didn't wear shoes because he never wore shoes. And he had the jutta on top of his head, his dreadlocks that when they came down, they touched the ground. And a dhoti. And at that moment, and then they got in the car. So it was like the total, you know, opposite. It was all her fear right there. It happened. And she tells a story about getting in the car and looking in Babaji's eyes and that moment that she told me that she knew that he had what she needed to know.
When she told me the story, she said, I asked her, what was the first thing you thought when you saw him? And she said, the very first thing? I said, yeah. She said, I looked at him and I thought, oh my God, what are my friends going to think? Because she said, now I was an artist. I drove a red Porsche. I gave cocktail parties. And then she said, then I looked in his eyes and knew that he was going to be able to teach me anything I needed to know.
Coincidentally, Babaji said before he even met Ma and before any of the Westerners came there, that Babaji saw her piece of art. I think it was the pants, the cast iron pants or the cast bronze pants. Is that right?
Yeah.
He saw that in a magazine before any of this happened, before any of them came over there. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened with that was Babaji saw Ma and he said, I know you, I've met you. And she said no, and she had done a year sabbatical in Italy. And when she was in Italy, she met Indira Gandhi and got her photo taken with Indira Gandhi, and that got on the cover of the Times of India. And that's where Babaji saw Ma before he met her.
Wow.
Interesting. Wichity in all Wichity's glory.
Yeah, when we moved here, when this place was used as a cattle ranch for a breeding herd, they had about 20 head of cattle up here, and this horse was part of the deal. And, you know, so that's when they said, oh, here's this horse. And I said, well, what are you going to do with it? He said, well, glue factory. I said, well, how much are they going to give you? It's $300. So I wrote him a check for $300. And that's how Wichity spent the rest of his years here grazing this grass. A little lonesome sometime, but there it is. There's the kids.
Yeah, Suresh and Sky, I think. There's Ma.
Yeah. Now, I am sorry that Gus left, because there's a picture coming up. Well, anyway, we'll see.
Kids at childcare. Who can recognize it?
Yeah.
Manoj, I can see. There, Lara and Prabha.
And Nirmala. Now, what was Babaji pointing at here? Anybody remember?
You know,
it's probably something big to move.
They were moving that tank that day.
Yeah, that was a prune dryer. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a crazy thing. But it had to move that day. There was no stopping it.
This is the kind of crazy stuff we did.
Yeah, I actually think this was the first Thanksgiving, and we invited Babaji for Thanksgiving. And he came and said, what's the program? And we thought, we're going to visit with you. And he got up and got dressed and went out, and we moved the prune dryer down the hill.
So this is CC being built, and that frame, this is the main room, and that frame, Pornanon figured out and did all the welds on it. To this day, I don't know how he did that, but that's the main structure for the main room in the CC.
All that was salvaged metal from DMRO.
Yeah. And this is building. This is right outside this window here. Shot of Babaji. When we built buildings, he built buildings with us. And the rest of the time, he moved rocks around. And that is the famous orange truck, doing what's no longer legal, which is having people ride in the back of it, FYI.
And Chandrakala there?
Chandrakala, yeah. That's early days, too. That's tear-down time.
Right in front of this building, first rock wall.
I think it was Raja was there. Kishori, that's Kishori, right?
Yeah, in front, that's Kishori.
Tea time.
Ambika.
All
Where
right.
were we going?
And Ambika was friends with Daniel Brubeck, which is, I think, how he wound up here, Dave Brubeck's son.
And then he wound up marrying Nora Bateson.
And married Nora Bateson. And as a result of that, of Daniel being here, several things happened. One is that he and his brother, who were also musicians, did several recordings with us, the women's choir and the songs of the Ramayana. And Dave Brubeck did 2 benefit concerts for us when we were building this building to raise money to build the building. And actually did one of the concerts right on that stage. Wonderful family. That's an open house day, I think. Yeah.
Couldn't hear that.
She said it was really dusty back here in
God.
those days. Yeah.
2 seasons, mud and dust. That's the Yagi Mound as it was in the beginning.
Calabasas, that's Atma. Yeah.
Ah, the stump.
This is right out in front of the store here, you know. A big stump in the ground.
And we decided we were going to dig it. Actually, Babaji probably decided that we were going to dig it out.
And it was at least a month project. We learned about redwood roots. Yeah.
Yeah, you could tell because Babaji's not in his work clothes, so that means he came out before class to see how they were doing. And then he went in to teach, and then he'd go back out again. There's Sky.
This is Lila's son.
Is that a trophy you're handing out, Charlie?
I think so. Must be an Olympics. Campgrounds?
It's like the yurt that was down.
Dome tents,
Yeah,
yes.
The dome
that's
tent.
right, the
Yeah,
dome
yeah, yeah.
tents. That's
That's the temple.
When
Yeah.
it was a kund. So
Yeah.
we had it dug in the ground for a while. So we'd sit and offer down into the fire.
yeah, so the same place, just at the very beginning.
And the hill above the lake, yeah. The big tree.
It's the oak tree, right?
Yeah, it's different leaf, right?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
right.
that's not here.
Oh, that's the big oak
Yeah, I
tree
think you're right.
Oh, you're right.
on the mound.
But that one's
That's us.
that's here.
In the lake bed.
That's
Lake
in the
bed.
lake bed. I think that's
Before
Rajesh
it
and
was a lake.
PK.
Is that PK?
Yeah, Rajesh and PK. There's
Oh yeah, and that's Rio with
that's
with
Babaji and
going up the
PK.
hill.
No, that was PK that Babaji couldn't get him to do anything unless there was a ball. Took him up to the top of that hill.
Look at Dayanand PK.
That was on the barn site. After we'd pretty much done taking it down.
Babaji's carrying stuff, of course.
That was the wood shop.
Yeah.
JD.
Yep.
Oh,
Possible.
making the lake.
Rented equipment. The fire.
Yeah, it was quite a fire. You drew quite a bit of attention. You could see it from town.
I don't know if folks know that story, but we're about to have Shivaratri again. And that fire happened after everyone was up singing all night long, Shivaratri, right? Kirtan goes all night long, and put the lingams in the lake. And then the next day, stay up. You're not supposed to go to sleep, right? And then go to bed the next day. And one of my best friends from Canada was staying in the upper area, the loft, and had put a candle in a paper cup. And that candle burnt through the paper cup, burnt through the first floor, went through the rafters, and then the whole building went up, right? And I had other friends from Canada staying with me, and I was in Cammie's cabin down by Kayakulpa, right? And somebody came down and went, "The building's on fire, the building's on fire," right? And so I had no idea what that meant. So we had a Volkswagen van, and we grabbed a bunch of hoses, just a little 3/4-inch hoses, and threw them in and came roaring up here and slid open the van door and fell out with all these hoses, and everybody's just standing there looking at this. And it's like it was coming up to the rescue, right? And the place was just incredible. Like the when you walked around and the building, the windows busted out and the flames went like 10 feet high. It was amazing Shivaratri fire.
Big yagya, yeah.
February.
Yeah, when I got here, there was one hose, and it looked like it was just peeing on the fire.
So I'm the one that went and got Soma busted at Butte, where I was, which is where Mahesh lives now. That was actually I built, sort of. And he got me, and I got in my truck, and Soma was down there, and I jumped out of my truck, and I went and ran and told Soma, "It was on fire!" And I ran out, and she came up, and I'll never forget it. She came out of the van. She did a somersault on the ground. It was the most macho thing I've ever seen in my life. With this little piss-ass hose. I mean, like a 1/2-inch garden hose, ready to put it out. And when I came around the edge of the garden and saw it from down there, it just looked like a pumpkin. It just was glowing like you had put a candle inside a pumpkin. And Soma, but we were all kind of just staring at Soma, who was, it was great, Soma. And then we watched it burn the rest of the night.
The fire marshal did come, fire chief in engines, and they just kept saying, "Is anyone in it? Is anyone in there?" And we kept saying no, but we had to account for everyone. Thank God no one was in the building.
And luckily it was a rainy February before we had years of drought, so the whole mountain didn't go up, just the building.
It was a good fire.
Ravana.
That's another fire, yes, that we don't do anymore. We build these 30 to 40-foot effigies of Ravana, and in the early days we would burn them standing And we'd all be out running around in the woods looking for sparks to make sure we didn't torch off the whole forest. But no more.
The original Burning Man.
Yes.
We all shot arrows into him. You can see Babaji there with the bow. And
Well, Sudhir would put firecrackers up in there, so it would explode as the fire was going up.
A little more
That
excitement.
was in his younger days, before he
And
became the fire
diesel
chief.
fuel, we'd send up straw and pillowcases with diesel fuel.
The Jai really helped with all the Ravanas. They kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
He's a character in the story of the Ramayana, the play that the children put on every year, and represents all our negativities.
So this is the last picture. You've heard some stories, you've seen some pictures. I think most everybody who's relatively recent knows the cast of characters here who are considered elders or founders. So come up and talk to us. It's amazing how many moments went into the creation of this place that you're living in with us, and how almost every one of those moments has something to do with Baba Hari Das and his inspiration. So I think we're all happy to talk about it, if you're interested.
One of the amazing things about Babaji was his range. You see all the construction work that's going on here, which of course is photograph worthy, but he would create all these events. He would get the musicians to play. There was the Bolo Band, which was one of the early bands, and he would have us throw dances. He would Easter egg hunts, Christmas.
Haunted house.
He wrote all of these different plays, of which a number of them we videoed and are available. I assume somewhere somebody's got them. Of exploits of Chidu and Junku in India, which is kind of both a send up on the fake gurus and a send up on the naive spiritual seekers, and constantly getting in and out of trouble and so on. And he would have us perform those at the New Year's retreat. But he always had something going. He would go and sit with us and watch us play volleyball, and actually played himself sometimes. And but it was just this constant energy. He would arrive here about, I don't know, 6 or before 6 o'clock on Saturday, do class, have breakfast, be the first one up to go out and work till tea time, as Dayanand said, then dinner, then volleyball, and he would leave about 8:30 at night whenever it got dark. And then Sunday morning, show up for satsang at noon. So it was kind of, he didn't understand weekends. Kalpana pointed that out at some point. And it was a 7-day-a-week operation. And but it was just this range of having fun, paying attention to the kids, loving animals, totally focused on the work, teaching classes. I mean, just amazing capacity. Writing books and so on. But keeping up with him was impossible. We tried.
So in the midst of all of that, as kids, we felt like we were the center of Babaji's universe, because we were in many ways. Like, we would get to go to the meal line first, or sit at his feet and get candy and things like that. And all these experiences were facilitated by Babaji, but also all the founders and all the elders here doing the work. And so the kids, we got to play along throughout. And Prabha and I were talking about this the other day. in the work that we're doing now, what is the motivation in that? And one of the ideas was so that we can continue the experience of children in the community, so that they can have a similar experience that we had when we were kids.